Hello, and welcome to Tomversations, a monthly conversation with me, your host, Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd, on a variety of enterprise IT subjects. This month, I'd like to talk about someone that's inside your organization right now plotting to do something they probably shouldn't. That's right, I want to talk about insider threats. In the world of IT security, we spend a lot of time worrying about the people who are lurking just outside the perimeter, hoping to steal valuable information when it leaks out of our environment, or worse yet, come barreling through the doors like some kind of Kool-Aid man trying to take our crown jewels and sell them off to the highest bidder, or extort us for money to keep them from being released. The sad truth is that most of the time, these threats are not what ends up causing security incidents. Instead, it's the people who work inside of our network who are either doing it purposefully or negligently. So let's have a conversation about that. If you look back over the history of security threats, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to focus on the people who are outside of the network, the bad actors, the unknowns, when in fact it's the people inside of our networks that are the ones that are causing the majority of the issues. Based on information that I was able to research, it turns out that about 60% of security incidents are caused by insider threats. And that number grew 47% by 2020, in the 2 years from 2018 to 2020. And I'm sure by now, in the year 2022, that number has gotten even higher. The average dwell time to find these incidents is around 197 days. So if you think about it, by the time the incident has already happened, it's been almost 6 months since we were able to detect it. That causes a huge amount of loss in the organization. It's tough to rank insider threats when it comes to the dollar amount that they can cost us. I've seen numbers as low as $100,000. I've seen numbers as high as tens of millions. It all depends on what was stolen and what the lasting impact to the organization can be, both from exposure but also from the resources necessary to clean up the problem. So why do people do this? What is the ultimate motivation? Well, as creative as people can be with the ways that they do the things, it usually comes down to one of three things. It could be fraud. People want to cover up a mistake or find a way to fix something. It could be monetary gain because people are greedy. That could be someone who's taking information to sell it to the highest bidder. It could be some executive who's attempting to get a deal on some insider trading info before a deal is announced. It could be the theft of intellectual property. As I mentioned, it's popular to sell it to somebody, but it's just as popular to take that information when you leave a job and use it as the basis for a new company if you have a leg up on what people are trying to do. The reason why insider threats are so difficult to track down is because they're happening inside of our network, and they're happening with people who legitimately need the access that they have in most cases. When it's someone outside of our organization, we can be pretty heavy-handed with them. You're not allowed to access this information. You're not allowed to log into these systems. We're going to keep a very tight leash on you. But what if it's an insider, an administrator of some kind, who needs access to that system, who has the ability to not only see that data, but also to grant themselves additional privileges to see other things? How is it easy to differentiate legitimate access from things that are a lot more nefarious in nature? We've come a long way with analytics in being able to detect anomalous behavior. But anomalous behavior in and of itself isn't enough for us to be able to classify something as an insider threat. We may not know that someone is trying to do something intentionally. And that leads to one of the biggest problems with insider threats. The majority of them are not malicious in nature. Sure, we hear stories about people who have left an organization and deleted virtual machines that ran some kind of infrastructure piece, or someone who snuck out sensitive files on an iPod. But the majority of the threats that we face are not malicious, they're negligent. Something like clicking on an email that is a spear phishing attempt to gain access to a system is negligence, not malicious. What about unencrypted data storage, where I downloaded a copy of some files to my laptop where they're no longer protected by some kind of a data loss prevention system. And suddenly I have a bunch of social security numbers or personally identifiable information sitting in relative clear text on my device. If my device gets compromised or stolen and I have no other protections, that data can get leaked. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I wasn't trying to be the bad guy. I was just trying to make my job easier, which actually leads to the other issue that we see with insider threat. It's not related to the fact that people are trying to do something that they are not supposed to. It's that they're trying to get around a control that they don't agree with or that makes their job more difficult. You probably have heard this called shadow IT. It's difficult to nail these problems down because, as mentioned, it takes days, months to detect them. And by the time we know what's going on, the damage could have already been done. Insiders can also create these incidents when they leave the company. No doubt in your IT career, you've probably heard of situations where someone left the company and downloaded files before they exited the building. You've probably seen sensitive employees being sent home immediately after putting in their notice to prevent them from accessing data on the way out the door. My counter to that has always been, if they knew they were leaving and they knew they were likely to get walked the moment they put in their notice, don't you think they probably already have the data that they wanted before they even put in their notice? Another way to look at insider threats is that they can be third parties. What kind of third parties would have access to your internal systems? I don't know. Contractors? Partners? People who need access to data that you have and have a working relationship with you already? They may not earn a paycheck from your HR department, but for the purposes of security, they're inside your network, and you need to consider them as insiders, and you need to have controls in place to deal with them. Because as we've seen over the last few years, it's often these third-party access arenas that allow attackers to get in and cause problems, whether it's an unsecured system in the third-party organization or some kind of sharing permissions that allow more access than necessary. And if you think this is a huge problem now, just wait, because this hybrid work model that we have started to explore in 2022 and beyond is just going to make things worse, because it's hard enough to keep track of all of the data and security controls that I have in place when I have a dedicated security operations team working in my enterprise. And now I just distributed my workforce to a number of places all over the globe, and I have them working with files both on their local machines, in my enterprise, and in the cloud. And it's much more difficult for me to control the home networks than it is to control the enterprise network, where I have all of these security features in place to keep an eye on things. So we've talked about the difficulties in how insider threats operate. How can we fix this problem? Because it's not very good to talk about awareness of insider threats if we don't have a solution for it. Well, the first thing you need to realize is that there are very few products that are actually going to fix this problem in general. Yes, there are point solutions, things like data loss prevention or monitoring systems that use heuristic and machine learning algorithms to examine behaviors of users. You can see that in systems that are tuned to alert you when someone logs into a system that they haven't logged in before, or that logs in at different times of the day. These point solutions are just that. They fix a problem. They don't uncover patterns of behavior. They don't reveal people who are acting against their own best interests. That takes a human or a group of humans in a security team trying to examine what's going on. It's necessary for you to make these decisions yourself and to have policies and procedures in place that help you make those determinations. As much as we might like to believe that the billion-dollar security industry filled with tools and software is our savior, reality is that we need policies and procedures in place that prevent these problems from occurring before they can ever be detected. The first thing that you need to do is you need to create a company culture of security. And I know that sounds boring and trite, but it is true. And if you don't believe me, look at some of the most successful organizations out there that have created cultures of security, sometimes maybe more than necessary. Obviously, any military organization is something you can look at with levels of classification and things like need to know basis. But look at a company like Apple Computers. They have a culture of security that prevents people from taking certain things home, that requires work in the office for certain products, that monitors other avenues to find potential data leaks. If someone starts releasing information about an unreleased product on social media or says, well, I have a source, they're able to track that source down and find out what's going on. That's because there is a culture of security. Now, you may think to yourself, oh, well, I need to put in all of the controls that I can because I want to keep people from leaking data. That causes other problems. And as mentioned on a previous episode of the On-Premise IT Roundtable, too much security is just as bad as not enough security. One of the other issues that you need to examine with this company security culture is helping your users understand the need to keep that data safe. Most people will safeguard their own personal information, things like their social security number or their license numbers, but they don't seem to care when it's somebody else's personal identifiable information. After all, it's not me. Why should I care about it? If you instill a culture in your organization that protects all data the same and treats all data as potentially disastrous if it were to get out, it impresses upon your employees the importance of keeping that data safe. It also impresses upon them the need to keep it secure and to prevent them from doing things with it that might be nefarious in nature, if you will. Something else you're going to have to do is you're going to have to start monitoring what goes on inside of your network. Yes, we have lots of tools that are allowing us to keep an eye on link utilization and hard drive capacities and CPU tasking. You're also going to have to watch what people are looking at. I've heard stories from friends of mine that on certain help desk systems, when they are accessing customer accounts, some of those accounts are flagged, so that if anyone accesses that system, that account, without authorization, such as that customer being on the phone or logging a support ticket, that can create an incident up to and including that user being fired for doing something that was outside of their task. It seems a little harsh, but when you think about some of the information that you can get on people in systems that are not directly tied to their own personal security, you can see why that could be a problem. Medical records, pay-per-view purchase history, anything that that person would not want to have publicly disclosed. And personally identifiable information is not just your social security number anymore. It's anything that can help paint a picture of who you are. And the more critical we are about how that information is shared or leaked, the better the security culture can be. Now, you run the risk of creating a kind of organizational malaise that says, oh, well, Big Brother is always keeping an eye on me now, so I can't do my job because I can't look anything up. But what it should be is not this idea that Big Brother is always watching you, but instead, Big Brother is trying to make sure that you're not doing something you're not supposed to be doing because it could be an indicator of compromise in your account. One of the ways that external threat actors try to gain access to internal systems is through things like phishing campaigns, or by trying to trick people into clicking on links and giving them access to accounts. And if your account suddenly starts accessing every system in the database, and you didn't do it, that's an indicator of compromise that you have been hacked, and they will be able to catch it and force you to change your password or reduce your privilege level until they can find out what happened. It may not necessarily be your fault, but your access level can cause problems. And I know that we've said it a lot in the past, but I just want to reiterate. Principles of least privilege and zero trust are absolutely critical in today's day and age. You may think to yourself, well, I'll just give myself administrative positions on the system because I need to do this one thing once a month, and it just makes my life easier so that I don't have to log into a bunch of extra systems. That's great until you accidentally do something or you are exposed and your privilege level allows you to get around certain controls. May not sound that bad for an IT administrator, right? What if you're an executive with access to sensitive information and a part of a company that you're really not supposed to have, but you asked for it because it makes your job easier, and then your credentials get stuffed or stolen? And the next thing you know, someone has the key to your kingdom, your crown jewels, if you will, and they're either going to extort you for it, or they're just going to release it and embarrass your company. That's happened quite frequently in 2022, and I don't expect it to slow down anytime soon. By tasking people with the least amount of privilege necessary to do their role, and by using zero trust principles that require authentication and constant monitoring of what they need access to versus what they are actually accessing, you can create a system where insiders don't have any more likelihood of causing the security incident than anyone else. The tools that we put in place from a variety of security companies all over the spectrum are just steps that fit into these policies that allow us to control how data is shared. As much as we might like to believe that the big bad guys are outside of our network trying to break down the walls like some IT security barbarian at the gate, the likelihood is more like the story of the Trojan horse, where we allow something into our system and then a large contingent of very angry Greeks comes out to burn everything down. Now, more likely what it is that someone is able to sneak in with some kind of attack or some kind of malicious intent and co-opt one of your users, either through negligence or through some other nefarious means, to give access that they shouldn't have to someone that shouldn't have it. Insider threats are not going to go away. They're as old as time. IT security doesn't change the likelihood that someone inside of your organization is going to cause an incident, either through malice or through incompetence. But the truth is that with a proper procedure, policy, and planning in place, you won't have to worry about what happens when the insider threat happens. All you need to do is plan for what will go on around it and prevent that from spreading any further. IT security is as much about damage control as it is keeping the walls up. That should just about do it for this episode of Tomversations. Thank you very much for tuning in. I should be back next month with another great topic. Until then, please make sure you check out our website at gestaltit.com, where you can see all of the episodes of Tomversations that we've recorded so far, as well as a lot of other great content, including the aforementioned On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. You can also check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/gestaltitvideo for more great video content. I will be back next month with another interesting Tomversation, and I hope to see you then.